Hello and welcome to The Take. I'm your host, Chesley McNeil. Each weekday, we're looking at stories, making headlines, and bringing experts from our community to give their take. Here's a look back at some of the top takes from this week and how those in the know are seeing those stories that impact you.
Target protests over the holiday weekend. Pastor Jamal Bryant of New Birth Missionary Baptist Church continued his call for a nationwide boycott of Target stores. This specific demonstration taking place Sunday in Conyers. He is protesting the corporation's decision in January to roll back its diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. In recent days, Target reported a 3% drop in first quarter sales, citing both tariff uncertainty and boycott pressure. Pastor Bryant's protest was also meant to mark 5 years since the murder of George Floyd, the Minneapolis man who died while in police custody.
Those in authority can only do what people allow them to do. And so I think it's not until America clears its throat and voices and registers its objection to what's taking place that we're going to see more of it take place.
A Target spokesperson sent 11Alive a statement in response to Pastor Bryant's latest demonstration, saying in part, Target is absolutely dedicated to fostering inclusivity for everyone, our team members, our guests, and our supply partners. Today, we are proud of the progress we've made since 2020 and believe it has allowed us to better serve the needs of our customers. We had originally scheduled Pastor Bryant to be on with us this show this morning, but we were told over the weekend he'd be unavailable to appear. But we're happy to be joined by Reverend Vince Van from New Birth Missionary Baptist Church. Welcome, Reverend. Thanks for being with us this morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for having us.
So part of Target's message says the company has pledged a lot of money, $2 billion to support Black-owned businesses after George Floyd's death, but has since rolled back its DEI initiative. So what is the message that it's sending to communities of color?
So when you see the rolling back of a promise that's made, it's really sending the message that we were only doing this for fashion. But the reality of it is it wasn't the fabric of what the company stood as their values. And now you're seeing the ramifications of that.
Pastor Bryant's really emphasized the spiritual dimension of this boycott, aligning it with Lent, calling it that Target fast. How does faith and activism play such an important role in this growing movement? And what role does spirituality play, do you feel, especially moving forward?
Incredible question. Dr. Bryant, when he went forth in his prayer for when we were preparing for Lent, what he wanted to make sure was that we grounded this in our principles of our faith. So you will see that this is actually the first movement since the Civil Rights Movement in which it is literally led by the Black church again. So we didn't start with the language of boycotting, but we started with 40 days of prayer and fasting. So we fasted from Target in hopes that in our prayer, in our grievances, that Target would change, we'll have conversations. And now you have shifted from this prayer and preparation through Lent, but now we've shifted to a full-fledged boycott led by Dr. Bryant.
So interesting. I just thought of Ebenezer Baptist Church as you're talking about that, and the church now launching this movement that has clearly had an impact already. We mentioned that Target CEO has said that the protests have already impacted the company's bottom line. Is your feeling that hitting that bottom line, really making that money impact, is the only way things would really change moving forward?
The truth of the matter is, it is. You think about what happened, again, I go back to the busboy boycott, which actually lasted over a year. And it was the economic ramifications of that boycott that brought all parties to the table. So for us, we're not interested in just standing outside and marching, but what we want to do is now impact our dollars. And we've seen this right now when the CEO talks about his compensation has dropped nearly 45%. We've seen now the losing of the shares. And this is what boycotting is. It's important because it highlights the power of the consumer activism, right? It also shows that it forces companies to decide whether they'll stand firm in their values or retreat to pressure. So, you know, the only way you have these kind of conversations, when you talk about the Black church, when folks figuring out where's the Black church, we had to do it by impacting directly the shareholders. And we're seeing these conversations now.
And some of the conversations include the potential that some job losses might be a consequence here, maybe leading to hundreds of jobs being cut. Do you see that as a necessary consequence for the overall goal?
Yeah, you asked a critical question about what is faith, the importance of faith in all of this. For us as Christian believers, we look at the ultimate faith. For God so loved the world that he gave up, he sacrificed his only begotten son. So when you move on for this walk that we're walking, we all understand that there are sacrifices that had to be made for the greater goal. And unfortunately, there are a few sacrifices that will be made, but we believe on the other side of this, folks are going to be blessed because of the fights led nationwide by folks who are coming together.
You mentioned the greater goal, far beyond Target here. What broader strategies maybe are being considered to ensure that corporate accountability across the board and sustained support for diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives are part of the future?
Yeah, one of the things I have to commend Dr. Bryan on, he's been strategic about this entire thing. So one of the things I want to say, we talked about, yes, the losses and the impact that it's had, but what he wanted to make sure is that as we're boycotting and fasting, to make sure that those Black businesses who were in Target, those Black businesses around the world, that they were supported. So on June 21st, June 22nd, we're having our second rendition of the Bullseye Black Market, which we're having over 100 vendors across the country, many Target vendors as well. They're coming in. They're going to be able to have their businesses here at Target. But also, the impact of this that we look forward is every week, every Sunday, Dr. Bryan always releases a new plan regarding this movement. So as I state, that Ebenezer what's a place that folks had their ear to, even Dexter, because they wanted to see what was the strategies. The same thing is happening each Sunday.
Drugstore shelves and beauty salon supply rooms bursting with products promising to straighten, strengthen, smooth, shine, curl, or otherwise tame women's hair. But now thousands of women are filing lawsuits against hair relaxer companies. They claim the chemicals in the products have put their health at risk. Joining us this morning is Alexandra Gross, Senior Policy Counsel of Consumer Reports Sustainability Policy Team. Welcome. Thanks for the time.
Thanks for having me.
So this is a topic that Consumer Reports has poured a lot of time and effort into covering. What specific patterns or trends have you uncovered about which demographic groups are most impacted by the regular use of hair relaxers, and how early usage really typically is such a big component of this?
Yes, I think the crux of the problem that we're facing is that cosmetics and beauty products right now are woefully underregulated. And the fact is that women and people of color are disproportionately exposed to more harmful chemicals because of the frequency of use of these products and also the way that it's marketed toward them, that they need to have straight hair, that they need to have hair a certain way. And consumers remain mostly unaware that toxic chemicals with such severe implications are being stocked on the shelves of their stores. Consumers shouldn't have to worry about these problems. You know, when you go to a store and pick something up, you should be able to see that what you're buying is going to keep you safe. But what we're seeing is women of color particularly, and young girls even, have these products marketed toward them that contain these terrible carcinogens and heavy metals and other very toxic chemicals that are worse the longer you use them. So if you're starting from you know, the age that a young girl starts to do her hair all the way up to adulthood, they've been using those products for many, many years, and you're seeing endocrine disrupting chemicals that eventually cause cancer, infertility, and other really terrible effects.
You know, you're talking about a lifetime of regular use and really now just starting to peel back what the long-term impacts are here. Were there any particular brands or product lines that you identified as having the highest concentrations of these potentially dangerous chemicals?
Yeah, so what Consumer Reports did is we picked 10 of the most popular synthetic braiding hair products, mostly from Amazon, that is, largely where women get these products from. And we tested them for carcinogens, heavy metals, and other chemicals. And what we found was 9 out of the 10 products contained lead. Now, we know there's no safe amount of lead,
right,
especially for children. It can cause developmental delays and disruptions. We also found carcinogens in 10 out of 10 of the products. And we found other volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, as we call them, cancer-causing chemicals in all of the samples.
That is worth repeating. 10 out of 10 showed carcinogens. So the important question then is, what does the data suggest about the health impact of the long-term repeated exposures to these relaxers, especially when they're combined with some other personal care products?
Yeah, I mean, I think what needs to happen is we need to know what we're putting on our bodies and in our hair and on our scalp. The government should be regulating these cosmetics and beauty products more strictly. So we're working on a campaign to get Congress to pass a safer beauty bill package that would ban these toxic chemicals at a federal level. We're also working in the states. Right now I'm working in New York State to pass the Beauty Justice Act, which would ban most of these harmful chemicals, so that when you go to the store and pick something up, you don't have to worry about having long-term exposures to toxins.
In a major shift in public health policy, U.S. Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. announced that the removal of the COVID-19 vaccine from the recommended list for healthy children and pregnant women is happening. This came in a brief video posted yesterday to social media, notably without any officials from the Atlanta-based CDC present. A CDC advisory panel is still set to meet next month to talk about fall vaccination recommendations, potentially focusing on high-risk groups. Secretary Kennedy, long a vocal skeptic of vaccines before taking office, says the decision was based on a lack of data supporting routine boosters for these groups.
Last year, the Biden administration urged healthy children to get yet another COVID shot despite the lack of any clinical data to support the repeat booster strategy in children.
That ends today. It's common sense and it's good science.
There's no evidence healthy kids need it today, and most countries have stopped recommending it for children.
Here now with more on this, Dr. Jody Guest, the Senior Vice Chair in the Department of Epidemiology at Emory University's Rollins School of Public Health. Welcome, and thanks for your perspective on this.
Absolutely. Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Let's start with your reaction to Secretary Kennedy's decision, and how does this align or not with the current scientific consensus?
Well, I think this was a surprising announcement, and it was surprising for a couple reasons. One being the way it was announced. This really goes outside of our normal policy and the way we talk about science. And my other reaction is the science has not changed. And so we still know we need these vaccines.
So what does that latest clinical data show us about the safety and the efficacy of COVID-19 vaccines for pregnant women and young children in the group where these requirements or suggestions are changing?
Well, the science is very strong. We have 5 years worth of data to show the safety of these vaccines. And it's important to recognize that any time a vaccine is used, the number one thing we study is safety. We study that before we even study how well it works to prevent infections and hospitalizations. So we know these vaccines are very, very safe, and we know the signals for when there are concerns about them. And so lots of data show us that these vaccines continue to be safe and are very necessary.
A lot of conversation about the safety of vaccines, but what about the safety for people if they don't get the shot? Lay out any potential public health risks in removing these groups from the vaccine guidance.
Pregnant people are at very high risk for severe complications of COVID-19 if they get sick while they're pregnant. They have about a 70% increased risk of severe complications. That is very significant. And so removing that group in particular from recommendations for COVID-19 puts them at an increased risk for hospitalization, ICU admissions, and puts their babies at risk.
How do you think that the policy change here will impact maybe overall vaccine confidence and that uptake across, the country in terms of other immunization efforts, especially in communities with existing hesitancy when it comes to vaccines overall?
Policy rollouts like this, changes like this that come outside of our normal process and do not include experts and their opinions on this really make the entire conversation about vaccines messy. And they're already pretty messy in the United States to start with. We know vaccine rates are dropping. They're dropping here in Georgia faster than they are in some other states. But this will continue to compound the problem we have with vaccine understanding and will increase the confusion.
Is part of the challenge the information that's out there? I mean, if you go online, you see all kinds of theories. There's a lot of conversation online that's just based on a lot of, thought or feeling. Is it increasingly difficult for the scientific community to get information out there and have it be received, do you feel, by the public?
I think so. COVID-19 was a very politicized pandemic, and the vaccines became very politicized, and that has had an effect on all other kinds of vaccines, particularly for children. And so we are still reeling from that. That is why we have a measles outbreak in the United States, dropping vaccination rates. So changes like this that come, again, outside of our normal policy and process really are going to compound that already existing problem.
All right, so this conversation is one that will continue in terms of confidence. If you can tell us what role that you think epidemiologists like you and academic institutions should play when announcements like this are made.
Well, I think, a bunch of us have been studying this for 5 years and have been watching. And one of the things that we can do is help synthesize new guidance that comes out and also raise questions when guidance comes out that seems to contradict scientific evidence. And so that's one of the things we're trying to do right now. There is no evidence to show that we should take these recommendations away from these kids. But I do want to be clear, we're always looking at that. We're always trying to make sure we're following the best evidence. And when we know changes should happen, we want to be talking about that.
I've heard people say, oh, COVID's still a thing, but then I have friends that work in hospitals that say, oh yeah, we see it all the time. Is that your message? COVID is still around us, and that's something for each person to take into consideration when they make their personal choice?
Yeah, COVID is still here. We have hundreds of people in the United States who die every single week still from COVID-19. That is deaths from COVID-19 every single week. And, those numbers are thankfully very reduced from what they were at the height of the pandemic, but that is still way too many people who are dying every single week when we can prevent it with vaccines. We need to remember, even if you're not personally at high risk, you probably know and love someone who is and are around them. And so it's about our personal risk and our personal health, but it's also about our community health and those we love.
It's a good point, thinking about the people around us. So before we go, just a refresher course on who you put in that high risk category.
So people who are over the age of 65 are at high risk for severe complications. People who are infants are at high risk for complications. People who are pregnant are at high risk. And then those who have other underlying health conditions. So that is a large sector of the United States and across the world who are in our higher risk groups. And I also want to point out long COVID is really an equal opportunity option if you do get COVID. We cannot yet predict who is most likely to get long COVID, so all of us are at risk for that.
11Alive is working to get you answers about a possible wastewater facility some fear could threaten one of Georgia's most pristine rivers. It's not only sparking worry in Franklin Springs, it's also got 5 other communities along the Broad River very concerned. Caitlin Ross joining us now with more on what's really in store for the river. So Caitlin, I'm curious about how this all started.
Cheryl, people in Franklin Springs didn't feel like they were getting a straight answer because they found out about this proposed development through an open records request, not from the mayor or any elected official. The mayor signed off on a request to the Environmental Protection Division to use the Broad River to get rid of wastewater because the EPD has to review all of those plans before an industry can even start to build. So when residents saw those documents, they panicked. But the mayor says that was an exploration of development, not a done deal.
I don't know how or why it got started. The thing is, with any of the industries that we talked to, we never got to the point where it needed to be discussed.
But the residents really feel differently. They think they should have been included in these talks and have a say about development in their neighborhood.
Is this true? Could somebody really do something so bad to our local community? You wonder, could they actually truly want to pollute such a clean river? That's the frustrating part, is answers. That's what we haven't gotten. Multiple questions have been asked, multiple emails, phone calls, and all we do is get a runaround. There's a lot of tension. People are worried for their homes. They're worried for their local communities.
Yeah, so personal for everyone involved here. Caitlin, I understand that Andrew's wife there has serious health concerns that her doctor actually flagged about development coming to that area. She has a chronic condition, right, but feels like anyone with health concerns should really speak out at this point.
That's exactly right, Cheryl. She was diagnosed with pulmonary hypertension. It's an incurable lung disease, and her doctor really felt that if this chicken rendering plant came to Franklin County, she would have to leave.
I had talked to my pulmonologist, and I was told that if a rendering plant and or processing plant were to come to this area, that I would have to move and relocate just due to health reasons and my lung issue. So it's very alarming to me, and so it's very personal to me.
Whenever something's going to affect your wife, it's personal. And for somebody to say that this is not detrimental, well, if your wife was diagnosed with pulmonary hypertension, it's detrimental.
You feel just how deeply personal it really is. And Caitlin, the mayor says it's personal to him as well, right? He told you his family's been threatened over this?
Yeah, this back and forth has gotten really nasty. He says his family have been subject to threats online that have caused real security concerns. He even had a weapons detection system set up in City Hall because he says he is that concerned about the threats.
My wife, who is a teacher, has had to have a deputy sheriff checking on her at school every day, which is ridiculous. Our home has to be checked on every day with local law enforcement because of these threats. The people that have made these threats and the people that are doing these things, it's just bullying and intimidation. It doesn't make me feel good at all, but I try to stay strong for them. I don't let them see me upset.
Do you take those threats seriously?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So some serious issues here, Caitlin. I guess the question is, where does it stand now and where do they go from here?
Well, I think both sides are hoping to come to a resolution with some answers. The people who live there say they want those guarantees that no rendering plant, no industrial wastewater plant is coming to Franklin Springs. The mayor says he is assuring that right now, but also added that he wants industry in Franklin Springs. He says about 9,000 people in the county leave every day to go somewhere else for work, and he wants to build an industry that people can stay in that community and work. But he says those industries have to be held accountable, and the people who live there absolutely agree. No matter what industry comes, it needs to be held accountable.
Right now, around 11,000 children are currently in Georgia's foster care system. Now, new data is suggesting that a vast majority of those children will eventually find a home outside their county. Here with more on this is Allison Ash, CEO of Wellroot Family Services. Welcome to the show. Thanks for the time.
Thank you for having me.
So talk about that frequency of kids moving to a different county for their new home and why that's significant.
It is significant. In the state of Georgia, about 68% of children in the foster care system end up being placed outside of their county. And just imagine what it would be like for a young child or a teenager to be taken into the foster care system, to be removed from their home. They need as much stability as possible. So if they can stay in their own county, they can stay in their own school system. But when that 68% that has to go to another county, they lose all their attachment. They lose not only being in their home with their parents, but they lose their community, their school community, their extracurricular activities. So we really need to keep kids in the county that they are from.
It's such an important point. You're thinking about any support system and regularity around them suddenly being taken at a time that is so potentially hurtful or difficult in so many other ways. So what are the biggest barriers that you're seeing in preventing more children from being placed within their home counties so that they don't lose all of those things? And then what's the state doing to try to address that?
The barrier really is having the sufficient number of homes that are willing to take a broad range of children into their home. Often families, foster families want to foster young children, for example, or they only want to foster one child at a time. Many children that come into the foster care system come in with their siblings or come in at age 12 or older. So we need to recruit foster families that are willing to foster potentially 3 or 4 children at a time, also families that are willing to foster older children.
I know that keeping those siblings together is certainly a priority, but can be such a challenge. You're dealing with children of all ages here, but how is a transition like this for some of the older children in particular who may have already developed an attachment to a previous home?
That's right. This issue of being placed outside of the county can be hardest on an older child because they are the ones that really are, they're on the football team. They're involved in extracurriculars in their county. They have deep relationships with teachers and friends at school. So we need to be able to keep kids in the county, and this often impacts the oldest kids the worst because of the idea that maybe having a preteen or a teen in the home is harder than having a young kid in the home. The reality is that Wellroot Family Services, our foster parents tell us that it's sometimes the most fun to foster an older child and to be a part of those extracurriculars and be a part of watching them grow into a young teenager or a young adult.
That's a good perspective. Maybe anybody who's listening to this who might have considered fostering at some point. This is a time that they're very needed. You mentioned just the need for more foster parents. Do you feel the state's doing enough to recruit and retain qualified foster parents, especially in this age group you're talking about, these older kids, teenagers, sibling groups, and maybe children with higher needs as well?
We have a wonderful Department of Children and Family Services that is doing great work to recruit, but it really takes the entire community coming together as a whole to recognize that we need families that are willing to foster and then willing to foster the sibling groups and foster teenagers. So it's about getting the word out more than anything else. So we're so grateful for this opportunity to talk with you and your viewers today.
Yeah, it really is about finding solutions for everyone involved. How is Wellroot specifically working to try to ease the crisis?
We are constantly recruiting, licensing, and training foster parents. We provide wraparound supports. We provide training specifically about how to foster adolescents, how to foster children who have experienced trauma. And we just need more families that are willing to step up and meet this critical need in our community.
3 tornadoes have been confirmed from Tuesday's afternoon storms in North Georgia. 2 separate EF0 tornadoes touched down in Carroll County. There was also an EF1 tornado that touched down in Coweta County. This takes the total for the month of May up to 13 across the 11Alive area, which encompasses all of North Georgia and parts of eastern Alabama. Here to give us a deeper look into this is Keith Stillman. He is the meteorologist in charge at the National Weather Service office in Peachtree City. Keith, welcome back to the show. How you doing, man?
Hey, good morning, Chesley.
All right. You were out surveying those storms. Tell us about those storms that we had here on Tuesday.
Yeah, I was out again. Tuesday's storms were a little more unique than what we've been experiencing because we talk about this all the time. We have the wedge front, the wedge front that moves into northern Georgia. The wedge front played a role in why we had tornadoes that spun up on Tuesday. So we had a line of storms move in from Alabama into western Georgia, and as it encountered that wedge front, the shear along that boundary enhanced the shear along the front, and we ended up getting tornadoes spin up. 2 in Carroll County, 1 in Coweta.
How much damage did you see out there, Keith?
A lot of tree damage. Thankfully, a lot of the tornadoes spun up in rural areas, particularly in Carroll County. There was some structural damage to some barns and sheds in Carroll County, but other than that, it was mostly trees and power lines. In Coweta, we got really lucky because it went through the city of Noonan, but it just happened to move through the north side where it was more of an industrial park area. And so there were a little more woods there, and then some of the more sturdier industrial warehouses that were there.
Talk to us again about what you see when you go out, what you're looking for when you go out there as far as tornado damage goes.
Sure. So we use a combination of tools. So we use the radar for 1, and then we'll use what we see on the ground for 2, and then we'll plot a lot of the damage we see along the way. And we use what are called damage indicators. Damage indicators are things such as trees, how damaged was a tree, how damaged was a structure like a house, or what the roof, what type of material was pulled off of it. We get to a warehouse, we look at the damage that was caused. That was the vent ripped off in the roof, was a little bit of the roofing material, was the siding, or was an entire wall blown in. And all of those give us clues as to how strong the winds were.
Talk to me about our tornado season. Severe weather around here can happen at any time, as you and I both know. But typically, I'd say from February, now we'll say February, all the way till about June, I guess is that time frame. But typically, it's April where we see our peak as far as tornadoes. Is that right?
April is the peak. Now, May can be, and it's a little unusual to see tornadoes this late in May. Not uncommon, we get them, but we're on the tail end of what would typically be a tornado season. But we're reaping what is happening further to our west and northwest. It's been an active pattern to our west, and we're on the downstream side of that, and there's nothing to really prevent what's happening to our west and moving into our region. So
how long could this last? I guess as long as that what's taking place out west lasts, right?
As long as that pattern. I mean, we just need the jet stream. We need the jet stream to get out of here, and we need summertime to actually move in.
And so we have that potential for the next 2 days, right?
Yeah, it looks like we're getting a pretty good wave to move in over the next 2 days, especially on Friday. And so when you have things like that within the jet stream, obviously the ingredients start to come together for tornadic storms.
You guys have been very busy. How busy of a season has it been for you guys going out?
It's been a very busy season. Just in May, we're at working on our 15th tornado. We're still working up in Whitfield County on a track just in our county warning area for May. And thus far this year, we've issued 63 tornado warnings just this year so far, which is well above average.
President Trump now has issued a new series of high-profile pardons, granting clemency to several individuals, among them Atlanta-based reality TV star Todd and Julie Chrisley, convicted of bank fraud and tax evasion, rapper NBA YoungBoy, after serving time for federal gun-related charges and prescription drug charges, a former Connecticut Governor John Rowland, who served prison time for accepting gifts from the state contractors. And there's signs that this may not be it. Here's what President Trump had to say when asked if he would pardon the men who were convicted of plotting to kidnap the Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer.
Will you pardon the people who are accused of conspiring to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer?
I'm going to look at it. I will take a look at it. It's been brought to my attention. I did watch the trial. It looked to me like somewhat of a railroad job. I'll be honest with you. It looked to me like some people said some stupid things. You know, they were drinking, and I think they said stupid things. But I'll take a look at that. And a lot of people are asking me that question from both sides, actually.
Since the beginning of his second term in January, President Trump has issued more than 1,500 pardons and commutations, marking one of the most extensive uses of presidential clemency in United States history. Here to make or add some more context to this is Professor Andrea Gillespie at the Emory Department of Political Science. Welcome back to the show, Andrea.
Thanks for having me.
All right, talk to me about this. What historical origin and intent of purpose of presidential pardon powers, and talk to us about that and how this has evolved over time.
So, it's rooted in the Constitution. This is the one place where a president has almost kind of universal executive authority to be able to make a decision without there being a check. So the president can pardon anybody he chooses. The one exception is that if somebody has been impeached, so a member of the executive branch, including a president or a cabinet member or a member of the federal judiciary gets impeached and removed from office, you cannot issue a pardon in those instances. But basically, the president has pretty wide latitude to pardon anybody he wants. Now, if you want to look at sort of like what the origins of what the intent of pardoning power was, you can go back to Federalist Paper number 74. And look to see kind of like what the idea was. And I think the idea, as I read Federalist 74, is that the pardon power was supposed to be used sparingly, because this is a president basically overruling the legal system and overruling the government and basically saying that the law doesn't apply to a particular person. As we have seen the pardon power evolve, the president's office typically has the office of pardon. And so people who were seeking presidential pardons or clemency often would file cases where they would talk about their crimes, whether you could talk about how the punishment might have been too severe, or how, the person who committed the crime has turned their life around. And then these cases go before the pardon attorney, and then the pardon attorney would make a recommendation to the administration about whether or not to proceed with granting a clemency or a full pardon. And so what we're seeing President Trump do is bypass that typical structure. And we're also looking at the nature of the types of people who are getting pardons and getting clemency. And so I think the concern that folks on the opposite side of the aisle are raising is that the people who are getting clemency either have some type of personal connection to Trump or his family. They know somebody who was close to President Trump. They are people who are perceived as being sort of politically connected to Trump, politically sympathetic to Trump. And so that's what's causing problems. And I think that there are questions about whether or not having access, making donations to the campaign, making donations or purchasing, his cryptocurrency coins are actually helping some people be able to, get more attention than others would. And so there's that corruption concern about it. And then I think there is the larger issue of whether or not the people who are getting this clemency are whether or not they're actually sorry for what they did and whether or not they'll turn their lives around now that they now have different sentences. What Trump is arguing is that a lot of the people that he has provided clemency or pardons for are people who were targets of lawfare. So of Democrats who were just purposely going after Republicans on things and then blowing up certain crimes. So that's part of the reason why the Chrisleys were able to get that, in addition to the advocacy of their daughter, Savannah. And, we look at some of these other prisoners, like the January 6th people, or, possibly if he does issue a pardon in the case of those, who attempted to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan. And so there was an idea that these were victims of lawfare and that they're trying to right what they saw as the excessive nature of prosecutions under the Biden administration.
Can they be returned, or can somebody override the president? Once he issues a pardon, is that it? It's done, you're free and that's it?
Well, as many of us learned at the end of the Biden administration, when he issued pardons, you can choose not to accept a pardon. Most people, if given that offer, of course, will likely take it.
What began as a beacon of hope for desperate fathers has become the subject of mounting complaints and financial questions. Senior investigative reporter Rebecca Lindstrom has spent the past 2 months looking into the Atlanta-based nonprofit the Fatherless Generation Foundation. Rebecca, first explain what this organization does for us.
One of the primary missions of the Fatherless Generation Foundation seems to be reuniting children with their biological fathers. This often involves some kind of bitter custody dispute, or maybe the father isn't being recognized by the court. So the foundation charges a fee to find them a low or no cost attorney. I spoke with one father who paid her more than $3,000, but on the day of court, no attorney showed up. The father says he was told by the attorney that the founder, Tori Evans Barton, never paid him.
And at that point in my life, I was in, I was in a desperate point in my life in regards to get custody of my children, because at that time, my son was going through a lot. My oldest son was going through a lot, and it was just a rough time.
Wow. All right, Rebecca, you talked to two former employees. What did they have to say?
Tara Martinez and Nina Wilson were the only two employees we could find, and they say they were never paid either. Martinez, who was hired last year to be the executive director, said she could never get Evans Barton to give her access to the financial records or bank accounts. And I want to note, these are two people who had jobs and left them to take these positions. The reality that they weren't going to get paid happened over the holidays, just to make it even worse.
I think she has also built up this, what I call prestige equity, and this persona so strongly now over these years that she feels like she has to maintain this image that she has now created for herself. But at what point are you doing that to the downfall of so many other people and hurting other people?
Did you get a chance to talk to the founder about these allegations?
I did. She did return my initial call and broadly cited personal difficulties, including a divorce and medical condition, as reasons for complaints and those unpaid bills. She also claimed she stopped working with some of the clients after learning what she called troubling information about them. Now, we also found lawsuits for unpaid rent and services related to her business and even her personal life. However, when we asked for specific responses to questions about her credentials and the complaints, she didn't respond, and all of our subsequent calls and emails went unanswered. And this is just really bizarre, Chesley, because we did find several positive reviews and lots of positive press in the past. So it's just unclear if she has good intentions, but just bad business practices. I mean, needless to say, there's a lot I would love to ask her.
We all would. Rebecca, do we know what happens to the fathers until these things get resolved?
Well, these fathers are in active court cases, so if they can't get an attorney, they're left sort of scrambling last minute to find another attorney. We spoke with one father who kind of got through the process, but the case became more and more complicated, and that is when the organization said, hey, this just isn't what we signed up for. We don't know if we can continue to support you. And so in a mid-case, he sort of got stranded. I will say in that case, she did continue to at least promise to pay some of those medical bills for a period of time. So again, there's just this conflicting information. And the problem is that the stakes in these kinds of cases is so high. And this is really the time where if you know that you're going to get involved with an organization that seems great, but the stakes are really high, you want to go through, you want to look at their credentials, you want to try to read those reviews and really consider if this is the best path.
Yeah, hopefully somebody out there will see your investigation and step in to help these guys out. Thanks a lot, Rebecca. Really appreciate it. If you know someone who has been affected by this organization, we'd love to hear about your experience. You can reach out to our team by calling 404-873-9111. Again, 404-873-9111 or emailing investigates@11alive.com. More concerns over safety at MARTA stations and on MARTA trains. Early Monday, Atlanta police responded to reports of a shooting in the area of Midtown Station. Detectives think it started from an argument between two people who knew each other that escalated into gunfire, leading to a woman possibly being shot unintentionally. The victim was taken to the hospital. MARTA police detained a possible suspect. Incidents like these continue to raise public concern, of course, about riding safety and what rights victims have should they find themselves in the crossfire. Joining us now this morning is Andrew Rogers, a crime attorney based here in Atlanta. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chesley. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Let's start off with some comments made by MARTA Police Chief, told to 11Alive earlier this month when we asked about the safety concerns. Take a listen to this.
The perception of crime is sometimes worse than the reality. As of almost June now, we're almost 40% down in violent crime on MARTA this year. Unfortunately, we still have people that use guns for conflict resolution, and we'll have to deal with that.
Andrew, what's your take on the police chief's comments there?
Well, you know, generally statistics can mean a lot of different things. And while I'm certainly supportive of people riding MARTA, especially those who have no other options, I think it's important to understand that while there may be a drop recently in crime, and I'm not sure what statistics exactly are being analyzed there, you can go on MARTA's website and look at their 5-year comparison of crime and see that there is certainly a trend of rising crime. And I think it would be more helpful, excuse me, to look at a full 12 months history rather than the past 4 or 5 months.
What is MARTA's legal duty to take care of its patrons?
Well, it has been the long-standing law in Georgia that any business owner or property owner who invites the public onto their property for business purposes is responsible for keeping those invitees, they're called business invitees, safe. And they're required to take reasonable steps in the light of dangers they're aware of to protect those people that are coming onto the property and typically don't know what the owner knows about the potential for risk of harm there. That's changed recently, drastically changed under the governor's new tort reform, making it more difficult, frankly, for negligent and careless property owners to be held accountable when they fail to or choose to not protect against dangers that they're aware of.
You know, several of these incidents hit when possible security gaps. From your perspective, what policy or safety improvements do you see or suggest that MARTA may need?
Well, it's a good question because MARTA is such a massive system with so many different places for the public to interact with the system. There seems to be a focus on train stations, which is important because the train stations, typically the ones further out from downtown, are large pieces of property where typically there are apartment communities nearby where the riders are on foot moving from the train stations to their apartments. And we've represented multiple victims of sexual assault who were attacked walking from the train station through or nearby near wooded areas that are on MARTA property that need to be protected just as vigorously as the actual train stations. So it's a difficult problem for MARTA. They've got their own police department because they know of the potential for dangerous crime. Our experience has been that there can be a better job of patrolling and keeping a watch over those transitional areas between the stations and people's homes.
All right. Attorney Andrew Rogers, appreciate you joining us today. Thank you for your insight. Have you ever heard of this? Unschooling. That's right, unschooling. It's a form of education that's becoming more and more popular. Instead of going to a traditional school or following a homeschool curriculum, kids decide what they want to do every day, what they want to learn. It's a trend that's catching on with millions of hits on social media. In fact, Kourtney Kardashian apparently supports it by stating that sending kids to school feels a bit dated. Well, although there are plenty of parents claiming that their child is thriving from this unschooling, I think it's just a trend, folks. In fact, the last time I checked, I don't think life experience or no testing can get you into college or universities, let alone get you a job at that. Perhaps you do have the time, the resources, and the energy to pull this off, and I think most of us don't, especially the resources. Not to mention, every child learns differently, with some needing and thriving off of structure and accountability. Unschooling sounds like no schooling to me. That's all we have for you today, folks. Make it a great day and try to encourage someone. Stay safe.